Ask 10 van life influencers what a real four-wheel drive van looks like, and 9 of them will show you a modern Sprinter with an aftermarket lift kit. Here's the problem. Decades before anyone called it overlanding, European and Japanese engineers were already building genuine 4x4 vans. Real transfer cases, real low range, real portal axles in some cases. For military units, fire brigades, and rally teams who couldn't afford to get stuck. 10 of them, ranked from obscure to legendary, and every single one of them could still outcrawl the camper van parked outside your local dealership. Let's count them down. Number 10, Bedford CF2. Nobody expects a British delivery van to have a viscous coupling shared with a supercar bloodline, but the Bedford CF2 4x4 does, and almost nobody remembers it existed. Bedford built the standard CF2 as a rear-wheel drive workhorse from 1984 through 1987, but starting that same year, a firm called FF Developments offered a factory-sanctioned four-wheel drive conversion built around the Ferguson viscous coupling. Drive stayed permanently on the rear wheels, and the coupling silently sent torque forward the instant the rear tires started to slip, with no driver input required beyond a 2-speed transfer box mounted behind the gearbox. Under the skin, the CF2 rode on a conventional separate ladder chassis, the same bones underneath every CF-based ambulance, fire tender, and delivery van of the era. The 4x4 conversion added a raised high-rise suspension option, with flared wheel arches to clear taller 550 by 16 and 750 by 16 tires, along with reinforced axle mounts to handle the extra driveline, hardware bolted underneath. Inside, the cabin got the same mid-1980s refresh every CF2 received. Brown herringbone cloth seats, a redesigned steering wheel and gear lever, an updated dashboard console, and a single key system for the ignition and door locks. Comfortable enough for a UK ambulance crew, not exactly luxurious. Because the four-wheel drive option only existed for a few years on a van nobody photographed for magazines, exact production numbers were never widely published, and most surviving examples went to the British military, fire brigades, or ambulance services rather than private buyers. Finding one today, restorers say, is genuinely difficult, which is exactly why so few people know this thing ever climbed a hill on 4 driven wheels in the first place. The wider CF story makes the 4-wheel drive version even easier to miss. Bedford built the CF as a direct rival to the Ford Transit starting back in 1969, and by the time the CF2 update arrived in 1984, the whole range had already lost significant ground to more modern forward control designs, like the Isuzu-derived Bedford Midi. That commercial squeeze meant Bedford had little incentive to promote a niche 4-wheel drive variant widely, even as FF Developments quietly continued refining the same underlying viscous coupling, technology that would eventually end up on the Jaguar XJ 220 Supercar and the McLaren F1's transmission. A surprisingly direct line from a British delivery van to 2 of the most famous cars ever built. If you've ever seen a working 4-wheel drive Bedford in the flesh, drop where you spotted it in the comments. There might be fewer of these left than you think. Number 9, Iveco Daily. The Iveco Daily wears a delivery van badge, but the 4x4 version was never built by Iveco's own van division. It came from a company called Scam, an Italian firm that specialized in military light tactical vehicles. Scam took the Daily's cab, engine, and main gearbox and grafted them onto its own purpose-built chassis, transfer gearbox, and axle assemblies, producing a genuine permanent 4-wheel drive system with a lockable center differential, splitting torque, roughly 2/3 to the rear and 1/3 to the front, plus front and rear differential locks for when things get genuinely ugly. The earliest Scam-built Daily 4x4s, dating back to the mid-1990s, used front and rear live axles riding on taper leaf springs, paired with a 3-speed transfer case that included an ultra-low crawler gear most road-going four-wheel drives never get close to. A genuinely simple, rugged setup, built for military and rescue use rather than road comfort. Inside, the cab kept Iveco's daily family dashboard, but the differential lock switches and transfer box controls sat within easy reach of the driver, and the seating was pure commercial truck, a single three-position driver's seat alongside a dual-passenger bench, built for a work crew, not a family road trip. The engineering underneath was serious enough that European overlanders and camper builders have been chasing these things for decades, precisely because the chassis was never softened for comfort the way most van-based 4x4s eventually get. A closed box section, front frame, and parabolic leaf springs at both drive axles gave it genuine truck-grade durability wrapped in a van-shaped body, and the cab itself was mounted deliberately high on that frame to give the suspension enough uncompromised travel to actually use its off-road capability, with driver and passenger assist handles fitted just to make climbing in and out manageable. It's a strange kind of split identity. The same daily platform that underpins countless ordinary delivery vans in cities across Europe also underpins a genuinely military-grade, off-road chassis wearing an identical badge. Scam's specialist background meant the daily 4x4 was never really designed to compete with soft road crossover vans at all. It was built for rescue services, utility operators, and remote terrain work where a normal daily simply couldn't follow, which is exactly why the chassis underneath got no compromises, while the cab above stayed comfortable enough for a full workday, which is exactly the kind of engineering overbranding story this whole list is built on. Would you trust a delivery van badge on something built by a military vehicle specialist? Say why in the comments. Number 8. UAZ 452 Bukanka. The UAZ 452, nicknamed the Bukanka, Russian for loaf of bread, because that's genuinely what the boxy shape looks like, has been in continuous production since 1965, which already makes most of the other vans on this list look young. Underneath that famously unglamorous body sits a proper body-on-frame ladder chassis with a cab-over-engine layout, driven by a part-time four-wheel drive system with a low-range transfer case that engineers in Ulyanovsk designed for taiga forests, mud, and roads that barely qualify as roads. The suspension is about as far from sophisticated as it gets, and that's the entire point. Leaf springs, front and rear, paired with simple hydraulic telescopic shock absorbers, all bolted to a frame that's famous among owners for being nearly impossible to actually break. Inside, the cabin is split into a two-seat driving compartment up front and a separate passenger or cargo area behind it, with a flat metal floor, analog gauges, and a basic 12-volt electrical system with no computer to diagnose and nothing electronic to fail in the middle of nowhere. What makes the Bukanka remarkable isn't refinement. It's the fact that Soviet engineers built something so mechanically simple that the same basic design has now outlasted the country that built it, several corporate reorganizations, and 6 decades of newer vans that came and went. The badge and body style have shifted over the years. Later production runs carry the UAZ 3741 designation for the standard van and UAZ 3303 for pickup derivatives. But the underlying frame, suspension, and drivetrain concept from 1965 has barely changed, which is precisely why parts interchangeability across 6 decades of production is still one of its biggest practical advantages. Most examples run a 2.7-litre ZMZ inline-4 gasoline engine, though earlier production used a smaller 2.4-litre unit, producing around 75 horsepower, and top speed on either engine barely clears 100 kilometers per hour, numbers that sound almost comically modest until you remember this thing was never designed to be fast, only unstoppable. Overlanders and camper builders in Europe and North America are now importing these things specifically because the low-tech approach means almost anything can be fixed with basic tools in the field, without a diagnostic computer or a dealership anywhere nearby? Would you trade every modern convenience for a chassis you could repair with a wrench and a prayer? Let us know below. Number 7. Toyota HiAce. By the mid-1990s, Toyota was quietly building one of the best equipped four-wheel drive vans most Western buyers never got the chance to own. The fourth generation HiAce, known by its internal H100 code, ran from 1989 to 2004 and offered genuine four-wheel drive hardware in two distinct flavors. A part-time system with locking front hubs, no center differential, and a low-range gear for real off-road work, or a full-time system with a viscous locking center, differential for permanent all-wheel traction on the road. Underneath, the H100 used an independent front suspension with double wishbones and torsion bars, while the rear rode on a dependent solid axle with either leaf or coil springs, depending on the trim level. That combination gave it genuine off-road articulation without sacrificing the ride quality expected of a passenger-hauling van. And the interior of a well-equipped mid-90s super custom four-wheel drive was almost embarrassingly plush for the segment. Electric windows, automatic climate control, dedicated rear cabin heating and cooling, power-operated sunshades, and a proper Sony stereo head unit, all wrapped around a genuinely capable off-road chassis. The most desirable versions ran Toyota's 3.0-liter 1K ZTE turbo diesel, an engine with a reputation for surviving well past the point most vehicles get scrapped, which is exactly why these HiAce four-wheel drives are now flooding into the camper conversion scene as they clear import age restrictions. Toyota kept refining the H100 platform throughout its 15-year run, with meaningful updates in 1993, 1996, and 1999, adding anti-lock brakes and airbags as standard by 1996, and seatbelt pretensioners by 1999. So a mid-90s example genuinely represents the sweet spot between the platform's early simplicity and its later electronic complexity. The 25-year import rule means the earliest H100s only started clearing customs in the United States around 2024, so this generation's American arrival is still very much in progress. Toyota also offered the H100 across a wide range of body configurations, with short and long wheelbases plus 3 distinct roof heights: flat, raised, and the tall, curved loaf of bread profile that most camper builders specifically hunt for, since it adds real standing headroom without changing the van's footprint. Buyers today are chasing 13 different engine variants across the H100's run, 6 petrol and 7 diesel, ranging from the workmanlike 1 RZE and 2 RZE E4s up through the fuel-injected 3 RZE FE and the beloved 1 KZTE turbo diesel. A van this well-equipped, built for genuine off-road duty, and still largely unknown outside JDM import circles, is exactly the kind of vehicle this list exists to surface. Would a 1995 minivan interior like this surprise you? Tell us in the comments. Number 6. Mitsubishi Delica Starwagon. If you've spent any time in overlanding or van life circles, you already know the Delica Starwagon by sight. But most of its fans have no idea how genuinely serious the engineering underneath actually is. Mitsubishi first offered four-wheel drive on the Delica in October 1982, on a chassis borrowed in part from the Pajero SUV. But the version most people picture today is the third generation, launched in June 1986, with a rounder, more aerodynamic body, Mitsubishi itself nicknamed the Soft Cube. That redesign moved the Delica from body-on-frame construction to a unibody chassis, but Mitsubishi kept the parts that actually mattered off-road: a solid rear axle riding on leaf springs, an independent front suspension using torsion bars instead of coil springs, and a genuine 2-speed transfer case with a low-range gear for real off-road crawling, Not just a marketing badge. The interior varied wildly across the roughly 100 documented Star Wagon trim variants, but the format stayed consistent. A forward control driving position, a boxy cabin with enormous glass area, and enough interior volume that it became one of Japan's favorite recreational vehicle platforms through the late 80s and early 90s. Despite that popularity in Japan, the Delica Star Wagon was never officially sold in North America in four-wheel drive form. The closest Americans got was a front-wheel drive, gas-only version simply called the Mitsubishi van. Every genuine four-wheel drive Star Wagon on North American roads today arrived as a personal import once it cleared the 25-year age exemption, which is exactly why so many showed up in overlanding communities almost overnight. Because that torsion bar front suspension doesn't accept simply swapping in taller coil springs. Most owners cap their lift at around 1.5 to 2 inches without going to full aftermarket suspension kits. A real limitation that hasn't stopped this from becoming one of the most sought-after camper platforms on the used import market anyway. Engine choices ranged from a 1.8-litre Sirius petrol all the way up to a 2.5-litre Astron turbo diesel, and buyers could also pick between a low-roof body and a high-roof version with an optional sunroof or the sought-after crystal light panoramic roof, which is part of why enthusiast sites document roughly 100 distinct Star Wagon variants across trim, roof, and drivetrain combinations. If you've seen one of these on the trail, was it running the torsion bar front-end stock or already lifted? Tell us below. Number 5. Ford Transit. Mark II. Ford's Transit is one of the best-known commercial vans on the planet, which makes it strange how few people know it once came with genuine four-wheel drive, decades before the current generation's all-wheel drive option. The Transit Mark II ran from 1977 through 1986, and in 1982, a four-wheel drive version arrived on the German market called the Syra Ford Transit, the name combining Sinpar, a French four-wheel drive specialist, and Rau, the Stuttgart Ford dealership that developed the conversion. It used a genuine Sinpar transfer case and running gear, offered with either the 2.0-litre petrol 4 or the 2.4-litre diesel on either wheelbase. The Mark II's underlying chassis and body mounting points stayed identical to the Mark I it replaced, which meant coach builders could bolt existing bodies straight onto the new platform without modification. Handy for the specialist conversion shops that built most of the four-wheel drive examples into ambulances, fire tenders, and expedition vehicles for European buyers who needed genuine off-road capability in a van-shaped package. Inside, the Mark II replaced the Mark I's metal dashboard with a plastic one, borrowed cabin trim from the contemporary Ford Cortina and Taunus passenger cars, and added softer suspension tuning along with proper sound, deadening as standard equipment, a real step up in refinement from the utilitarian Mark I. Because the four-wheel drive option was a German market specialist fitment rather than a mainstream factory line item, most surviving examples spent their working lives with emergency services or specialist operators, rather than private owners, and very few crossed into English-speaking markets at all. The Mark II's chassis cab versions were especially popular with specialist bodybuilders, precisely because Ford kept the body, mounting points unchanged from the Mark I, meaning a huge existing catalog of ambulance, fire tender, and camper conversions could be transferred onto the newer, four-wheel drive capable platform without redesigning a single mounting bracket. Engine options across the wider Mark II range grew from a simple 1.6-litre Kent petrol at launch to a 2.5-litre direct injection diesel introduced in the 1984 facelift, though the Syra four-wheel drive conversion itself was specifically offered with just a 2.0-litre petrol or 2.4-litre diesel, matched to whichever wheelbase a customer needed. A Ford this recognizable, hiding a drivetrain this obscure, is exactly the kind of gap this channel exists to close. Did you know the Transit ever came four-wheel drive from the factory era? Let us know. Number 4. Mercedes-Benz T1. Mercedes-Benz launched the T1 van, also called the Bremen Transporter, or TN internally, in 1977 as a conventional front or rear-wheel drive commercial vehicle. It took a specialist German shop called Eigelhaut to turn it into something genuinely off-road capable. Starting in 1983, Eigelhaut Allrad began fitting complete axle assemblies and transfer cases lifted straight from the Mercedes G-Wagon onto the T1's chassis, creating a real selectable four-wheel drive system with a proper low range, not a badge engineering exercise. That meant the T1's underside carried genuine G-Wagon hardware, portal-style axles built for serious ground clearance, a low-range transfer case, and reinforced mounting points to handle a drivetrain. The van's own chassis was never originally engineered around. Inside, the cab kept the T1's straightforward commercial layout, a basic dashboard, and bench-style seating depending on configuration, because Eigelhaut's engineering effort went entirely into what was bolted underneath, not what the driver saw from behind the wheel. The conversion wasn't just a curiosity. An Eigelhaut converted T1 4x4 finished in second place on the Liberty Raid Rally, a brutal long-distance event running from Cologne through Khartoum to Cairo. A result that proved the G-Wagon axle swap wasn't just theoretical off-road capability, but something that could survive a genuine international desert rally. That kind of result mattered because the T1 platform, sold in Europe as the Bremen Transporter, after the city where Mercedes built it, was never engineered from the ground up as an off-road vehicle the way the G-Wagon itself was. Eigelhaut's achievement was proving that a completely different vehicle's driveline could be transplanted wholesale and survive. Punishment its donor was actually designed for. Standard T1 vans came in a range of payload classes, badged 208 through 310, each number roughly indicating the vehicle's weight rating in hundreds of kilograms. And Eigelhaut's conversion program worked across multiple versions within that range rather than a single fixed model, meaning surviving examples vary in exact configuration depending on which base van a customer brought in for the G-Wagon swap. A delivery van finishing second on a Cologne to Cairo rally using stolen G-Wagon underpinnings might be the single most underrated build on this entire list. Did you know G-Wagon axles ever ended up under a van? Say so below. Number 3. Nissan Caravan. The Nissan Caravan has been one of Japan's default commercial vans since the early 1970s, sold under half a dozen names worldwide, Urvan, King Van, and Homie among them, which makes it easy to forget that genuine four-wheel drive capability didn't arrive until relatively late in the van's life. In October 1987, Nissan added a proper four-wheel drive option to the E24 generation Caravan, giving what had always been a straightforward rear-wheel drive workhorse a real off-road transfer case for the first time. That four-wheel drive hardware sat underneath a conventional body-on-frame commercial van chassis with a cab-over-engine layout, the same fundamental architecture that made the Caravan popular with fleets and delivery operators for decades. Trim levels range from bare-bones cargo configurations all the way up to the luxurious Silk Road SGL package, which added rotating front seats and comfort equipment that felt genuinely out of place on a commercial van platform, proof that even a workhorse could be dressed up when Nissan wanted to sell it to families instead of fleets. Because the Caravan sold under so many different badges across so many markets, most Western viewers have seen this exact van 100 times without ever registering that a four-wheel drive version existed at all. It simply never got exported anywhere the option mattered. Nissan's cab-over-engine layout also meant the engine sat directly beneath and slightly behind the front seats, rather than out in front of the cabin, a packaging choice shared across nearly every Japanese commercial van of the era, and one that maximized cargo and passenger space, at the cost of a slightly harsher ride and more engine noise inside the cabin compared to a conventional front-engine layout. The E24 generation that introduced four-wheel drive also received a diesel upgrade in 1986 with the LD20T turbo diesel, replacing the older naturally aspirated SD22 unit, giving buyers a genuinely more capable engine right around the same window that four-wheel drive became available, meaning the best-equipped late 80s Caravans combined both upgrades in the same vehicle. A vehicle this common, hiding a genuinely rare drivetrain in plain sight, might be the most overlooked entry on this whole countdown. Have you ever spotted a four-wheel drive Caravan and not realized what you were looking at? Number 2, Volkswagen LT. Unlike most of the vans on this list, the Volkswagen LT 4x4 wasn't a specialist coach builder's aftermarket project. Volkswagen built it in-house, and built shockingly few of them. Out of roughly 5 million total LT vans produced, only around 1,250 got the factory four-wheel drive treatment, almost all of them long wheelbase, LT40s, destined for Austrian fire brigades and Alpine military service, where the terrain simply demanded it. Underneath, VW fitted a genuine new process transfer case, the same family of unit used on contemporary Chevrolet Blazers, giving the LT true high and low range gearing, along with front and rear differential locks for serious off-road traction. The straight-six turbodiesel engine sat mounted low under the front seats, in what owners still call the doghouse, feeding a 5-speed gearbox and a roughly 50-centimeter drive shaft back to that transfer case. Giant anti-roll bars and a factory suspension lift rounded out a conversion built for genuinely brutal Alpine winters, not weekend camping trips. Inside, the cabin stayed pure commercial truck. Functional, unglamorous, and built entirely around the job of getting a fire crew or a military unit somewhere a normal van simply couldn't reach. With production numbers this small and a mission this specific, most examples that survive today are still wearing their original fire service or military liveries. The LT platform itself sold in the millions worldwide as a completely conventional rear-wheel drive commercial van across the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, which makes the four-wheel drive variant's tiny production run even more striking. Volkswagen clearly had the engineering capability to build these at scale and simply chose not to, treating it as a genuine niche special order rather than a mainstream product line. Many surviving four-wheel drive LTs are documented in the hands of Austrian volunteer fire brigades from the 1980s and 90s, equipped by specialist firefighting equipment makers like Rosenbauer, and conversions of the standard LT for those services were common enough that a fair number are still in low mileage, well-maintained condition decades later, simply because a fire truck spends most of its life parked and ready, rather than actually driven. A 1,250 unit factory build that most VW enthusiasts have never heard of. Does a number that small surprise you? Let us know in the comments. Number 1, Volkswagen T3 Syncro. Every vehicle on this list has had to earn its spot, but the Volkswagen T3 Syncro earns the top slot on a technicality that actually matters. Unlike the later T4 Syncro, which relies purely on a viscous coupling to send power to the front axle with no way to disengage it, and no low-range gearing at all, the T3 Syncro's standard gearbox is genuinely badged 4+G, the G standing for Gelände, German for off-road, meaning every single T3 Syncro left the factory with a real low-range crawler gear built in, not just permanent all-wheel traction. Underneath, Volkswagen didn't just bolt a front differential onto the standard T3 platform. The Syncro rides on its own dedicated subframe, engineered specifically to carry the four-wheel drive hardware, sitting roughly 25 centimeters higher than a standard two-wheel drive T3 as a direct result. VW had to relocate the fuel tank over the top of the gearbox and move the spare tire inside the cabin just to make room for everything underneath, and the heaviest duty factory variant riding on 16-inch wheels with a reinforced floor pan and wider arches, sat higher still. A genuinely rare, factory-built special package built for the roughest terrain VW's engineers could imagine. The Syncro's reputation in overlanding circles today isn't hype. It's the direct result of a factory that engineered a proper low-range 4x4 system into a van in 1984, when most of its competitors were still bolting on all-wheel drive as an afterthought. Volkswagen kept refining the platform right up until T3 production ended in 1992, with 1986 model year revisions bringing a proper tachometer, an enlarged water-cooled engine, and redesigned transmissions. Improvements that make the later Syncros the most refined and most sought after. Examples of the breed today. The original Syncro came with a 1.9-litre Wasserboxer petrol engine producing 78 horsepower. Modest on paper, but paired with genuine low-range gearing, it was enough to make the platform a favorite among the US Army and Air Force in Germany during the 1980s, who used T3s as non-tactical administrative vehicles across their European bases. Everything else on this countdown had to prove it belonged in a conversation about serious four-wheel drive vans. The T3 Syncro is the reason that conversation exists in the first place. Which vehicle on this list surprised you the most, and do you think anything could actually outclass the Syncro? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe for more 4x4s nobody talks about. 10 vans, 4 countries, and every one of them built to do a job a modern camper's marketing department could only dream up. If this list changed how you look at that Sprinter parked next to yours, hit subscribe. We're covering the vehicles nobody else talks about every week.